Hello everyone, I am IISc and I am here today with my two PhD colleagues, Ms. Preeti and Ms. Satyavati. We are excited to bring you a very special podcast featuring the CEO of the Royal Society of Chemistry, Dr. Helen Payne. Dr. Helen is a well-known figure in the research community and hardly needs an introduction, but I would still like to briefly highlight some of her remarkable achievements. Dr. Helen completed her PhD in Coordination Chemistry at the University of Exeter in UK. Shortly after, she began her journey at the Royal Society of Chemistry in Marketing and Communication. Over her remarkable 30-year career with RSC, she has taken on various roles, including Chartered Chemist and Chartered Scientist. Dr. Helen has held several strategic leadership positions, progressing from Executive Director to Deputy Chief Executive Officer and now CEO. From 2018 to 2021, Dr. Helen served as Chair of the Science Council UK, where she played a pivotal role in advancing science and the profession. She has also spearheaded international campaigns focusing on inclusion and diversity in science, and has been a strong advocate for addressing global challenges through chemical sciences. We are delighted to have Dr. Payne with us today. She will share her insights on leadership in research, the future of the publishing process, and career opportunities for PhD students outside of academia. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Helen Payne. Welcome, ma'am.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So, ma'am, when I was reading your biography, I noticed you immediately joined RSC after completing your PhD. So how was this transition from academia to publishing house, and what motivated you to go for publishing house, leaving that academia?
Gosh, so you've correctly identified I've been with the Royal Society of Chemistry for 30 years. That's my whole career spent at the RSC. But before that, as you pointed out, I did a degree and PhD in chemistry at the University of Exeter. I think when I was doing my PhD, I loved the science. I enjoyed the curiosity of doing chemistry. I liked being in the lab. I liked doing research. And I got a huge amount from it, both kind of personally, but also the community that I belonged to, both at Exeter, but also a broader chemical science community. But what became really clear to me when I was doing my PhD, my real motivation was working with people and working within the community. And I think at the point that I chose to move out of academia, the opportunities 30 years ago, particularly for women in chemistry, weren't quite so clear to me. The incentivization or the encouragement to stay on in academia wasn't so great as it might be today. And partly because I was really keen to work with people, the opportunity at the RSC came up and I made that transition. And I am really, really pleased that I did, because obviously it's it served me really well for 30 years and I've developed a strong career at the RSC. But equally, I'm really curious now about what it might have been like to stay in academia. So I think I do have, I have seen both sides, but I do miss the research side. Even now, I kind of miss that being in the lab. But I've done some amazing things since then, and it's been because of the people I work with.
Yeah. So as you said, you actually miss, working in the lab. So what advice would you like to give PhD students like us who might be seeking to, find jobs outside of academia? And what kind of, opportunities for Indian students are available if they wish to move abroad regarding this kind of career?
So I think it's a really important decision point, isn't it? When you're all doing your PhDs now, when you reach the end of your PhD, that decision what to do next is quite big, and you sometimes don't realise at the time about that is going to kind of really set the course for your future career and what you do next. That saying, there's always opportunities to change throughout your career. I happen to have had a very linear career at the RSC, but many people I work with have done many different things. In fact, that's included moving out of academia into another opportunity and then going back into academia, maybe later in your career when you feel that you want to pick up research again, and that becomes more of a possibility. I think in terms of what the opportunities are, what chemistry gives you and what doing a PhD gives you is the opportunity to learn really key skills, both practical skills, which can be applied in many different ways, whether that's in your job or even in your, common sense and practical skills that you need through life. It also gives you really good research and communication skills, and they are really valuable in whichever career kind of choice you make. So whether you're going into a related field or going into management, or going into maybe a profession that requires real analytical skills or kind of mathematical skills or clear thinking skills, chemistry really gives you the basis for that. So I think there are many opportunities other than just continuing in the lab. That said, I think for those who have a real kind of curiosity for research, and if it's something that really is important to you and you get really excited by, then I would always encourage people to follow the thing that makes them happy. Yeah, where you possibly can. I realise that's not always an opportunity for everybody, but things that really kind of motivate you and that energise you, I would always encourage people to do. So I guess there is a decision point when you finish your PhD. I'd always encourage people to think about the opportunities. And you mentioned about opportunities for working abroad. Again, that can be a huge move, for individuals, can't it? And not everybody has that, the opportunity because they may have family commitments or other commitments. But talk to people, reach out to networks. Through the RSC, there's always an opportunity to be put in contact with others who have kind of followed that path. And particularly, do your research to find out what it's like to study abroad or to work abroad. And then obviously navigate the various, the paths in to work in that particular kind of country, particularly if there are visa requirements and kind of other compliance things that you have to be. But in chemistry, because there's so much visibility, isn't there, of research groups in different countries, and you can read the research articles and you can read, about the individuals, then that should open up a lot of opportunities to find out more about different routes and different pathways.
Thank you. Since, ma'am, you have both the taste of research and like leading the major company like RSC, so what is more challenging for you, like doing research and publishing papers, or like leading the RSC like major publishing house?
So you asked me about what's more challenging, leading the Royal Society of Chemistry and a publishing business and membership organisation, or working in research. My personal experience is that both bring challenges, but both bring opportunities. For me, obviously, leading the RSC came, 20, 30 years after doing my research. Having said that, I remember being in the lab and doing my PhD and really having some quite significant challenges in terms of, when your experiments don't work and you're working for week after week or month after month to get a particular outcome, and it doesn't come, and you worry, don't you? You worry constantly about, gosh, will I have enough results to write up? Is it something I'm doing wrong? Do I need to, change my my experiments, or do I need to change my PhD? And which actually did happen. I changed the focus of my PhD after my first year. I started working in ferrocinophanes, substitute ferrocinophanes. And that was a really good project. And some of the real specific things for me was working on variable temperature NMR. But it was during that work that we identified there were some other opportunities. And then I moved on to some work with terpiridine. So in effect, when I wrote up my PhD, it was almost like writing up 2 PhDs because I had 2 distinct kind of areas, but they were linked by the variable temperature NMR. But having recognised that the ferrocenophane work wasn't producing the level of kind of output that was really needed for me to complete, moving into a slightly kind of related but different output was actually really good. And what I learned from that is it's absolutely fine when things don't go according to plan, and if things don't work, and if you have to go back and start again, that's absolutely fine. So fast forward to my role now, I still draw on that experience of knowing that it doesn't matter if things don't go right first time. It doesn't matter if you have to think differently about the next, step or the next actions that you need to take. So it's absolutely sure that, leading an organisation such as the Royal Society of Chemistry, and particularly in, the global challenges that we work within because of the economic challenge, the societal challenges that we all now face, the scale of responsibility and challenge is much greater, but yet the fundamentals of how those challenges manifest themselves are kind of quite similar. You know, having to think about what the next steps are, having to plan ahead. So I still think my training as a chemist and as a research student have stood me in very good stead. And the thing it teaches you more than anything, and this is all credit to all of you doing PhDs, resilience. And you may not know it yet, but you will in the future. You'll realise just how much resilience you have developed through your PhD, because you will draw on it, you will come back to it so often. And
Resilience, patience, and perseverance.
yeah. So, and always, I mean, I'm a great one for planning ahead, but I'm also a great reflector. So if I really do have a difficult choice to make in my job, or something really feels difficult, I often think back to the things that really challenged me at university, and some of those moments where I failed at something, or my exam didn't go as well, or, you know, I had to change something about my experiment. And I think about that, and I use that to kind of think, if I could cope with that, I can cope with this. Even though the scale and the context is very different, personally it's still a very good attribute to have.
Thank you, ma'am. So, ma'am, now you are very busy with the schedule. So sometimes you miss your PhD days or research while in the university.
Do I miss my PhD research?
PhD research.
Well,
that culture, like sometimes experiments are not working and things are not going the way they should go. So that thing you miss while doing this job.
I think I mentioned it, there are parts I miss, and I miss I was trained to do particular activities in the lab. I was trained, you know, in good practice in lab techniques. I was trained to analyse data and produce reports. I was trained to interpret spectra. I was trained to do what would have been in the very early days of some of the computer simulations linked to my research. And I kind of miss that, having that really key expertise in something and carrying that out. So one of my kind of wishes is if I could go back into that, I wouldn't be trained any longer, and my skills and experience would no longer be up, you know, at the level that yours are. But you know, I almost wish I could go back into the lab and run a chromatography column, or to be faced with a set of NMR spectra and I could interpret them. But that said, there is still some transferable skills that I take into my job now, and so I think that's kind of quite key. So the practical side, I probably do miss my work. But what I'm really grateful for is, even as Chief Executive of the Royal Society of Chemistry, and arguably I do not need to know the ins and outs of chemistry or specifics in my day-to-day job, but there are things that I do have to do as the CEO. For example, when I'm talking to academics, if I am doing a talk about the prizes that we award, it requires me to be articulate in particular aspects of chemistry, and particularly to be able to read a speech that contains some quite complex chemistry terminology. And I'm always very grateful that I can do that and understand the chemistry and be credible, because that's quite important to the RSC's reputation, is to be credible in the terms of our ability to understand it and to talk about chemistry. So again, I think there's a link there, and differences. And actually, this podcast has made me really think about your questions about the similarities between what I did as a PhD student and what I do now. So.
Thank you, ma'am.
So, ma'am, like whenever we are doing PhD, you might have also, you know, had that time. At that time, you might have also think of about having more papers and, like, you know, publishing more, because like it's an important milestone when you're doing a PhD. So, how do you think it is important for, you know, students to engage with that kind of publishing process? And also, like, what are the tips and strategies you would like to give us so that we can, you know, improve our chances for a successful publication? Yeah.
So the first thing I'd say is, during your PhD and your research, publications are an important part of it, but it's not the only part. So it should not all be focused on the number of papers you can publish, because your time will come, and that will come. Some PhD students are very lucky that they can publish from the research that they do during their PhD. I was very fortunate that I published from my PhD, but I know many students who don't, and that's not a reflection on the student. That's just a reflection on the nature of the research, or where that particular field is at that point, or maybe where the supervisor's focus is. It is important, though, for PhD students to be aware of the publishing process and the landscape, and the importance of communicating your research. And whether that's through a peer-reviewed publication, or whether that's through a conference, or through a poster, or through an online discussion, think about that kind of in everything that means that you are communicating what you are doing with an external audience. One, it's a good skill to gather, but also it's really important because research is done for a reason, and research is funded for a reason. And that's to get outcomes that make our understanding of chemistry and the interdisciplinarity of science better understood, and therefore there's applications that, eventually you really have an impact on the world. And, we are all part of making the world better through chemistry. So I would say that it's a really good opportunity during a PhD to understand publications. One, you'll need to use them in your research. So that's, you're going to be reading papers all the time, and that's really important. Secondly, learn about the process of publishing and what publications are all about. So, understanding, what writing a paper entails, understanding about, abstracts, understanding about how to present your data. And you will learn that through working with your PI, your supervisor, with others in your group, but also others in your wider network. And again, I would always encourage researchers, and in particular during a PhD or postdoc, to be attending conferences. And of course, they're more accessible now because you can do them both in person and often online. But understanding what the steps you take to write a paper is also really good. And during your thesis writing, you'll develop many of those skills anyway. And I'm sure you will be very, very adept at this stage in your career. The world of publishing is changing quite significantly. There's a clear shift to publishing open access that makes your work more accessible to everybody, and that's a really good thing. But equally, focus on, the goes back to the communicating what you're doing. And there is a lot of opportunity and choice for very many different publications. Don't always feel that it's, you are being, you have to strive for the, this absolute pinnacle of the highest, journal that's possible. Use the opportunity to just to get yourself known and to get your research heard.
So, ma'am, what are the greatest challenges you have faced during your transition from academia to that publishing role? Like, because you are from chemistry background, and it should be difficult for someone to go from chemistry to the publishing role. So, what are the challenges you have faced?
Do you know, I'm not sure if that is the challenge, transitioning from academia into publishing. And in fact, my early career was spent with our membership community, so that transition for me was very easy because I was with my community. And one thing which is really, I think, quite a privilege doing chemistry and studying chemistry is you are part of a global chemical science community. Doesn't matter which country, doesn't matter which particular field of chemistry, there's a really connected community that is there for you forever. And I work with lots of different disciplines and professions, and I think it's chemistry that really exemplifies that connections and community. So for me, in my early career, that transition was quite straightforward because as I said, I started a job where I spent 2 years travelling around the UK and some international travel, talking to students about the value and the benefits of being a member of the RSC, and talking about the excitement of chemistry, and that was just a natural continuation.
And like when we are talking about challenges, and you have been in this publishing business for so long, what do you think are the specific challenges that are faced by women in particular, and like if there exists any kind of gender bias in this field as well, and like how is RSC working towards addressing those kind of challenges? So it's more about how women are actually facing the problem or challenge.
So I think there's two parts to that question. Firstly, about women should feel able to pursue any career that excites them and that they are, passionate about, or that motivates them. I mean, not everybody's excited by their jobs, but that motivates them and gives them some personal reward and also recognition. And, every woman who's studied chemistry is equal to everybody who studies chemistry. There is no delineation, there's no, difference. And women should feel confident to continue in their careers. I certainly did mine. I was once told, or a comment was made to me when I was doing my PhD, that I had obviously taken a decision not to get married, not to have a family, because I was doing a PhD. That would be wasted. And I thought, gosh, have I made a career choice so early just by doing a PhD? That's absolute nonsense. I have a family. I have 2 sons. They're grown up now. One studied chemistry. One's just got a graduate job in chemistry. It's absolutely possible. You do not. But there are obviously challenges in having a family, whilst male or female, when you are working. So that's very clear. But there's also clear recognition over many, many years that women haven't progressed as far in some of the academic roles. And 10 years ago, the RSC undertook some research to look at that specifically. And the data and the evidence was very clear that the statistics showed that the progression of women in academia was not as great as men. But what it uncovered was that there was some of the culture in chemistry was not as supportive, and that there were things that were presenting barriers more to women than to men. So we have sought to address that and to put in place good practice and to share learnings and understanding and take action to change that culture. And that happens. It happens slowly because some of these attitudes and biases and behaviours take a while to change and influence. But they must change, and don't let anything that you may have perception of put you off your career or your opportunities. And I'd say that to anybody and everybody. So there's work that we do at the RSC that's the whole community. And we've done a lot of work in gender bias and publishing, particularly around peer review, and particularly around refereeing, and just to ensure that there is as much as possible support there and a change really happens. We also embody that within the organisation to make sure that our teams, and in fact, from gender, purely on a gender basis, the RSC's employee base is 60% plus women, and then men. And in fact, I think that because the RSC employs very positive support for those, particularly around family and enabling career breaks. So we've taken some very proactive action, but it requires us all to work together as a community to make the change. And I would, very clearly to call out poor behaviour where that in itself is preventing women's progression.
Ma'am, as we know, work-life balance in academia is very skewed, like PhD is a 24/7 kind of a job. So is this the same case in publishing house also?
So the work-life balance in a publishing house is, I think, very different from academia, but I appreciate in academia it's what you make it, and there shouldn't really be a need for anybody to work 24 hours, 7 days a week, in any job, in any role. Some of those challenges still exist in publishing, and when you're in a kind of full-time employment, there's still the need to travel, which can often impact on kind of work life. But it's always about balance. So certainly from the RSC's perspective, with our teams, there is a clear, we work a 35-hour week over 5 days. We use a lot of flexible working to enable people to balance the kind of work-life balance, particularly around family commitment. So I think there are some differences, but I think it's for an individual to own their own kind of work-life balance and feel confident in, structuring the work so that it meets their kind of needs, as well as whether it's their kind of, teams or research kind of needs or whether it's the employer's needs. So again, coming back to your question, I think there are some differences, but everybody should have a good work-life balance. So be responsible for your own work-life balance, ask for opportunities, whether it's in research, academia, or with your employer. But certainly from the RSC's perspective, that's what we strive for our teams.
As you said, like work-life balance is better compared to academia. So what kind of other activities you enjoy outside of your work or professional commitments?
Well, interestingly, I think a lot of the things I do outside of work, I have a family, so that comes first all the time. So I enjoy family life and all the things that comes with that. I have also, for the last many years, actually probably about 12, 15 years, been very actively engaged in local education. Partly when my sons went to secondary school, I became a school governor. I committed quite a lot of time to supporting that school. I then became chair of the Board of Governors. I then became chair of the Multi-Academy Trust, which is in the UK, a Multi-Academy Trust is an organisation that oversees a number of schools in a kind of local region. So I think a lot of my outside of work is actually more applying what I do in work but it's within the local community, and I feel very passionate about making a difference in my local community. So that's why I do a lot of work in the local education system. If you ask me what my real passion is, I realise that I have a real passion for kind of architectural design and things, interior design especially. So I think if I had my career all over again, I'd be an interior designer. So I could do that all day, every day. So I think things I enjoy are around the history of architecture but also people aspect as well.
Was this interest from the beginning, or maybe down the line did you realize that you like interior design?
I think I've always liked interior. I think even as a young child, I think that's and partly the reason I moved house a lot as a child. My dad was in the Navy, so we were always moving house and always. So I always had a new kind of room in the house, kind of style. So I think maybe it came from that. More recently, though, at the RSC, we have a beautiful building in London, Burlington House, and it has a library. And I was given a project to refurbish the library, and through that, I developed a real love of historical buildings and interior design and the way that you use space. So I think it comes from that. So.
Ma'am, you joined RSC 30 years before. That time, you ever thought you will become the CEO?
Did I ever think I'd become the CEO?
Yeah.
When I joined I originally joined one because it was obviously a job I wanted to go to, and I was very fortunate to be successful. I had intended to stay for 3 years because when in the UK, I did my A levels, so my end of secondary school examinations took me 2 years. My degree was 3 years. My PhD was 3 years, and I thought, well, I'll stay in a job for 3 years because that was the cycle of. At the end of 3 years, I realised there were more opportunities for me at the RSC, and every time I thought about changing job, I had a new opportunity either presented or I created it. So I think no, not from the very beginning, but I think it would be true to say that probably in the last kind of 10, 15 years, when I looked at the role of CEO, I started to think I could do that. That I could do it. So I think I did have an aspiration for quite some years, maybe not 30 years, but definitely at some point in my career, I thought that's a job I could do. And
in your biography, I also read that you also studied business later on.
Study business.
Yeah.
I've done marketing qualifications, so I think because you have to. I mean, the chemistry gave me huge amounts, and I said a lot of transferable skills. When you get into your job or employment, your career, you realise there are things that you can, and that comes back to the continued professional development. So yes, I've done courses and qualifications in business and marketing.
And ma'am, do you have any questions for us?
Well, my question for you would be just thinking about the role of the Royal Society of Chemistry and the role that we play in the wider community. Is there more that the Royal Society of Chemistry could do to be supporting students, particularly during your PhD and with your career aspirations?
So I think I personally feel that in terms of like exposure, in terms of career opportunities outside of academia is still limited in India. And like for last 2-3 years, I came to know about that. Okay, we can also make a career in publishing and all. But when I was in like college or doing my graduation, that time I did not have that much of knowledge that okay, we can after doing PhD we can move towards this kind of career as well. So there is that lack of exposure. So what I feel is that RSC can actually take a lead by maybe organizing some kind of outreach programs and having interactive sessions with students like us, maybe more one-to-one sessions.
But it's good to know that kind of activity is supported and is something that you value.
So, so thank you, Dr. Helen, for joining us today and sharing insightful thoughts about career opportunities outside of academia, and also sharing your journey and your personal challenges that you faced. It was like really inspiring for us to know, and especially because you're from chemistry background, so we feel more closer to you because since we all are also chemistry students. So it was really nice talking to another chemist. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's been wonderful to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.